This is the Adopted Mom Podcast. Adoption may look different for each family, but we need solidarity from other crazy people who took this leap. And that is what we do here. We encourage, we build up, we share the wins and losses. We lean on each other, and we get through this together. Thanks for joining us. Hey guys, welcome to the Adopted Mom Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 13. And in this episode, we're actually going to get to hear 3 different interviews. Now, as adoptive moms, this is so touch and go. We know that we're learning as we go along, and we get to see our kids' experience and live it a little bit, but it's so hard to understand the hindsight because we haven't been there yet. So today's episode is going to feature interviews from 3 different adults who were adopted at various ages and through various systems. First of all, we have Kathleen Barnes. She was actually in the podcast in Season 1 with her daughter Kennedy. So in addition to being adopted as a baby, she grew up to adopt herself. And I love it. She has such a unique perspective that she's gotten to live both sides of it. And she's going to chat with us about, about what went right for her and how that story could have so easily gone different ways. Second, we're going to have Leah Barsky. She was adopted from Russia at 8 months old, and she's grown up, obviously, as an American, but she knows the difference. She knows that that wasn't originally her home, and she has this perspective, and it hasn't broken her. She's still maintained a great head on her shoulders, and she's going to talk to us about not letting that identity crisis break you, coming to that fork in the road where we have to choose whether we're going to let this completely destroy us, that we are so confused about who we are, or we don't know, or we have so many questions, or we're going to trust God and keep moving. Lastly, we're going to talk to JP Bubbis. He was adopted privately, but it was a similar situation to foster care at the age of 16, and he's in college now. And after a few bumpy years, he's come to really love his story and appreciate it, and I can't wait for you to hear from all 3 of them. Like I said, first we're going to talk to Kathleen Barnes, and we'll jump into that here in just a minute. But first, I wanted to remind you guys about our sponsor for this month, and it's Christine Bauer with her book, Those 3 Words. It's a story of being a birth mom and what that has meant for her. And I always link to that in my show notes, but you can find it on Amazon by searching for Those 3 Words. It's an amazing read, and you will not regret picking up that book. So let's jump into my interview with Kathleen. All right, welcome, Kathleen. And I have to give this caveat before we start your interview that you are officially the second person who is a repeat guest on the Adoptive Mom Podcast. So congratulations.
That is a very big honor. Thank you.
Some of you may remember Kathleen from her episode in Season 1 with her adopted daughter, Kennedy. And that was mainly about Kennedy's story. I'm not even sure that you mentioned in that episode that you were also adopted. And so I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Again, welcome. But I think that I'm so excited to hear your adoption story because I love hearing from kids who were adopted and then grew up to adopt themselves. And I love hearing how their stories piece together in that. So let's jump right in, if that's okay with you. How did your parents come to adopt you?
Yes, definitely. And I will definitely say, as someone who was adopted, that was kind of a bucket list item that I thought would be neat someday. Like, ooh, I got to be adopted. I hope that maybe I'll get to do that someday as well. So it was really neat to be able to, continue that blessing with someone. So my parents actually began... They got married in I don't even know. They're old. But they got married, had 2 biological kiddos, 2 boys. And then about 10 years down the road, they actually started doing foster care. And my dad is a doctor. My mom was a nurse. And so they specifically took cases where children were deemed medically fragile. And so they would take kind of those cases that were more difficult, feeding tubes, malnourished, things like that. And they actually took 2 different girls, totally different situations, a year apart. One had cerebral palsy, and then the other had spina bifida, and they adopted both of those girls. And so those are actually my sisters, not biological, but they were both adopted. in the 70s. And after my sister Sarah, which is the one that has spina bifida, they were like, okay, we're done. And I think they closed and all that. Then in 84, 83, I don't even know.
You're aging yourself.
84, I know. Back in the 1900s.
Isn't that a weird thing to say?
Yes, it is. So I don't know much of the situation. Like, I hear some stories, but little disclaimer, my dad passed away when I was 12. And I think he knows more of the story than my mom did. And so I don't have all the pieces. But here's what I do know. So my dad is not my biological. My adopted father was an obstetrician. And there came a situation where there was a very young girl, like 14, was pregnant, not from the area. Her family was also, like, the dad was also a doctor. And they, something came about to where my dad knew these people and said, we will adopt this baby. And actually, he even delivered me.
Wow.
So they knew it was going to happen. It was a planned thing. I know my mom has said they even went on like a little vacation. My mom and dad went on a vacation like around my due date. And she said she was a nervous wreck because she was like, what if we're gone? And she goes into labor. So they knew that this was going to happen. And my dad, my adopted dad, delivered me.
So he was literally the first person to hold you. That's so cool.
Yes, and that is a really special thing because my sisters don't have that same story. So it's always fun to be able to say, that he was, the first person to meet me. And so I'm trying to think of where to go from there.
Well, you were just saying that, you were a planned adoption, which is, I mean, we talk about planned babies a lot. And when you adopt through the foster care system, not much of that is planned. And you know this having adopted from the foster care system, but you were a planned adoption, which is really cool.
Yes, definitely. I know I have some pictures because my birthday is December 28th. And so I know my mom has pictures of me with a big bow on my head. They brought me home from the hospital. And my sister, Sarah's birthday is December 27th. So they joke that I was the birthday present she did not want.
Yeah, you stole her thunder.
I really did, and I totally didn't mean to. But it's just kind of a joke because it was, I think, her 6th birthday. And so obviously what 6-year-old wants a baby, a baby sister. So some things, Alex, you asked me to come on here and just kind of share, an adoption story where I continued in life in a productive way and, in some ways, quote, a success of, being a married woman with children and a job and a bachelor's degree. And so
and you're a teacher, so you're like raising up the future generation, which is very notable.
No pressure.
Yeah.
But you mentioned all that too, and, asked me to do this. And so I just kind of started, thinking like, okay, so what was it about, my adoption story that really contributed to that and what made mine a success? Again, quote, success. I don't know what the measure is there. But I think one of the main things that I've noticed just from observing other stories and being around other people is, growing up, it was never a secret. It was always just like a common understanding and knowledge that we were adopted, like me and my sisters. That was just kind of one other, like her hair's brown, her eyes are brown, and oh yeah, she's adopted. It was just part of our description, but in the same sense, it wasn't something where we felt like we were like separate. We weren't treated like different necessarily. It was just an open, like it was never a secret. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that, there was no sit down conversation when you were 8 for them to tell you that you were adopted.
Exactly. And so, and in that sense too, I always felt like this was my family. I mean, I never felt like I wasn't supposed to be part of this family. My parents very much highlighted it as that was God's plan for us to be in this family. And so I never felt that I didn't fit with the family I was with. And so I think that's really important. I know people make decisions for different reasons. And I don't even know I don't know where it began. I just know that I always knew. I will say one of my siblings that is adopted is biracial. And so for her, it was a lot more apparent that she was adopted. And I'm sure that kind of opened up the conversation for all of us to be, told that we're adopted. So I think we all just kind of knew. And I'm sure that was partly because couldn't really be kept secret.
Right.
Due to that.
No, you're just really tan.
Yeah. So I do think that was really important, though, to always just know that was part of our story. And I'm thankful for my parents for doing that. Another thing, though, that I, while thinking through this, that I think was really important, I was trying to think like, okay, who is going to be listening? Is it parents? Is it children, that are adopted, or parents that are going to adopt? And for those parents that are going to adopt or have adopted, I think something that's really important that I've discovered is that this is always something that you're still going to need to process at some point. And it in no way is to offend them. It's just, I think it's probably somewhere in one of those stages of like development, right? With identity,
Yeah.
I should know this since I'm a teacher, right?
You got kindergartners. They're just trying to learn how to tie their shoes, right?
So I think that's just part of our development is our identity. And so that's something that we all need to process and think through. And I did witness, a lot of my sisters going through that in the teen years and kind of going through this, oh, who am I? And I want to find my birth mother. And that was not received very well by my mother. I think she just kind of took it personally, took it like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. And I won't go into their reasons and her reasons for feeling that. But I think what was important for me is that I was still able to process that, but I just didn't go through that with my mother. And as someone who adopted later in life, it's really important to me that my daughter knows that that's okay for her to think those things through and for her to wonder about her family. And
I've heard that. No, I was just saying, I've heard that from several different kids who are adopted who have grown up and become adults. And that's something that they've always, the ones that are super successful, that's a very common denominator. The two things that you've said, which are that it was never a secret and that they were allowed to ask the hard questions. I know that was not your story, though, that you were not allowed to ask the hard questions to your parents necessarily, right?
Mm-hmm. And so I know we were talking about this earlier. We talked about the importance for adoptive parents, to have people in place in your life that you aren't the only person that child can go to. I feel like we have some great support systems of people that we know that she can talk to, that we trust, that we, know we're going to feed her the same stuff that we would want to tell her. But don't do drugs, don't have sex, all that. But still to know that I'm okay with that. And my mother very much respects and loves the people that I mainly had a high school Bible teacher that I went to a lot. And to this day, my mother sings her praises because she knows that that person was there for me to counsel me through that stage of life. And that just wasn't something that I was going to approach with my mom. So I think, go ahead.
No, would you suggest that, that parents wait to see what their kids are going to do if they're willing to come to them, or would you encourage adoptive parents to put people like this in place, to put mentors in their children's lives and be an active part of that?
I think it's important for us to always have other adults in our lives. I mean, even with, my children that are 6 and 2, I have other people that I feel like they have a rapport with. So I do think it's, I do try to approach, I ask questions to Kennedy and I encourage talking to her about things. But, there have been times where, specifically her aunt-to-be, come June 16th, her aunt-to-be, Heather, she has come to me and told me, like, Kennedy shared this information with me and we talked through this, and I don't feel offended that she didn't share it with me. I'm so thankful that that situation came up and that someone was there for her.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm available, but I also understand that, in the sense that I was worried I would offend my mom, I think that she also is probably going to have those natural fears too. And Heather's awesome because she actually will tell Kennedy, is it okay if I tell your mom that we talked about this? And so Kennedy fully knows that, that I know about these conversations.
Right.
So again, it's this transparency of, being open about things. And I just think that's so important. And it's very different from my story personally, in some ways, because I was kind of afraid to go through that process with my mom. But I'm thankful because now I feel like we're really trying to safeguard our relationship with our child.
Yeah.
So that she develops and, has her identity and doesn't struggle with that.
Absolutely. And so if you're thinking just of what contributed to you becoming a successful adult and not letting that inevitable identity crisis get you down, as it does for so many kids who have been adopted and just don't know what to do or who they are, what is there any other contributing factor that you can think of? And I know that you're a believer, and that is awesome, obviously. And yes. I know that you would attribute Jesus to a lot of that, but is there, I'm curious, was there ever a defining moment where maybe you were wrapped up in some bad stuff, maybe you were making poor decisions, as many kids do, where you just decided that this was not going to be a part of your identity?
Obviously, yes. Whenever I was thinking through, like, okay, what has been my saving grace? Jesus is my answer. But I do ultimately, yes, he is at the forefront. But I do think that surrounding yourself with supportive people, with good people in your life that are going to lead you down the correct path really help. Just thinking through this, I was telling my husband, I said, it was important to me to know that I choose my family. It's not a piece of paper, and it's not a blood relative that determines, well, this is what my family did, so this is who I am. I really felt like I was encouraged, even by my siblings growing up, because a lot of them did struggle with some different things and made some mistakes and went down some different paths. And they would encourage me, kind of pressure me and say, you're going to be different, which was stressful. But it did encourage me to know, like, you know, I can choose the people that I surround myself with in my life and the support system that I have. And so that would be almost my kind of tip for children that are adopted, is I think it's important that we understand. And I know my daughter struggled with that because she was older when she was adopted. And she struggled with, like, who am I? Am I bailing on my family? Am I taking on a new identity? And so it was really important for her to think through, like, I choose my family and I choose who I am. And I just think that was really important and freeing for her. I had people in my life, good adults in my life other than just my parents. You know, losing my dad when I was only 12 meant a lot of pressure on my mom. And so it was great that, you know, obviously the Lord provided people on my path that I really do think were my saving grace.
Absolutely. So that was going to be one of the questions that I asked you, was what advice would you give to kids who have been adopted? And you answered that beautifully. But I also wanted to ask, what advice would you give to parents? You know firsthand, you know both sides of this, and that is such a unique position to be in. And so you know the struggles of what to do, and how parenting in and of itself is such a roller coaster of, like, am I doing this right? Who knows? I guess we'll find out in 20 years or whatever.
Exactly.
And with adoption,
are they gonna be in therapy about me?
Exactly.
You know?
And with adoption, it's just doubled. So what advice would you give to parents just to navigate this and to create contributing members of society as best we can?
Definitely. I do not have the answers. Let me start with that. My children are 13, 6, and 2. So with that being said,
as someone who turned out okay,
I'm stepping out in faith in the belief that, you know, we're going to do the best we can, and that every child is going to be different, and each kid's going to have different needs, and each kid's going to make different decisions no matter what I put in front of them. With that, you know, being said, my other two sisters are also adopted, and like I had mentioned, they, you know, really struggled, and their stories don't look the same as me. One of them is not married. I don't want to go into too much and necessarily, like, disrespect them, but their paths have not been as easy. And I do think that's just, I do think some of it was identity issues and knowing who we are. I think part of that identity was losing our dad. He was our rock. And so I think that the adoption side of it, though, is a key factor that really caused some struggle and still does in some ways. I know I've had to just really reassure my sisters that, you know, Jesus knows who we are and he loves us and he didn't make a mistake, and he is perfect. Because I think they're always looking to what this perfect idea of a parent should be. And so anyway, their story is, you know, just really different than mine. And I think that we've just got to do our best, and we've also got to give our babies to Jesus and say, not my will, but yours be done. And just have that faith.
Oh, I love it. And we talk a lot about sovereignty here on the podcast, and that's something that I feel like as adoptive parents, we get such a heaping dose of that so early on. When I talk to older women, especially, it's just, you know, sovereignty is such a lifelong journey of learning how to understand that. And as adoptive parents, we have to trust in that so early on for our adopted kids, who we had so little to do with a lot of their story.
Yes.
And we're just trying to carry the torch into adulthood, so to speak.
Yes.
And we have to,
and I mean,
yeah.
I could allow that. I mean, and I have at times allowed it to really consume me, like those anxieties and knowing some information about my daughter's birth mother. And I have completely had these conversations with her. This is no shock. I'm kind of terrified. There are times when I'm like, oh my gosh, you could be a complete hellion as a teenager. And I've even told her you kind of have every right to be, because you've had a lot of crap thrown at you and you've been very mistreated and very beaten down. And there's a lot of reasons for you to be a very angry person. But we talk a lot, and she's a very smart girl. So I think that's helpful because she, I hope, is processing this well. And I just tell her, those are the places, those tough, broken places are where, Jesus can make things beautiful. And that's where you're going to be a testimony. And, when she would share some of that tough stuff with me, there have been some conversations we've had about, all those songs that talk about him making the broken beautiful, and that we cannot let Satan defeat us in that, and that we have to allow it to be where we step back and the Lord steps in. And with that, I have to have faith that, she's probably going to be a really horrible teenager. And I know what I'm doing right now is the best I can do, and I know she ultimately doesn't answer to me. We pull the God card a lot. We're like, okay, Jesus is watching.
I love that, though, that she ultimately doesn't answer to you. That is so encouraging and kind of, I don't know, freedom giving to adoptive parents, and it takes that load off. And I feel like we say this to ourselves all the time, and we feel that release, and then we walk out of the room and the burden comes right back on.
Yes.
But
oh my goodness, yes.
I could just repeat that to myself over and over again, that he, in my case, ultimately doesn't answer to me. And I love that. That needs to be like on a poster with, kittens or something.
Oh my goodness. Would they be hanging on a branch?
Probably, like pawing at a leaf or something. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It'll be adorable.
I have to give a little shout out then, because I did this old, looked like a 60s or 70s titled, covered book, and it was called Discipline Them, Love Them. And I did this way before I even had kids, with our friend Kanya and her mother-in-law, Kanya Carlson. Got to put her in there. Yes. And the big takeaway from that book study that we did was, if you're going to correctly teach them, you've got to put the focus on God being ultimately the one in charge. Because if you're just raising them to answer to you, there's going to be a day where you're not around.
Yeah.
And you're not watching. And so we do try to talk a lot with our kids about that you're not just doing this because mom and dad want you to, but God has called us to this. And so, even when they throw things back at us, like, well, you screwed up, which our 6-year-old really likes to do right now. Yeah, apparently we taught him the term freaking heck. He said, Mom and Dad, I've heard you say that. You've said it. And I'm like, okay, well, I am a sinner in need of grace.
This sounds like a very sophisticated term, Kathleen.
I know. I'm like, I don't know what the freaking heck he's talking about.
I love it.
Yep.
So funny. Okay, well, I'm just so grateful that you came on for a second time, and I love hearing from you. You are so full of wisdom. So thanks for taking some time to share with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for the honor. And I just hope, God be glorified and it be exactly what somebody out there needs to hear. Because I know some of your podcasts have been exactly what I have needed to hear. So.
Well, thank you so much. All right, guys, I hope you loved that interview from Kathleen. She's so great. And next up, we're going to have Leah Barsky. Now, I teed this up a little bit in the interview, but I wanted to remind you, Leah was adopted from Russia at 8 months. So she wasn't a true newborn, but she was still young enough to not really remember any difference. Now, her parents never hid her backstory and her history from her, and that she grew up having such a rich understanding of her culture and who she was. And I love that. I love that Leah talks about in her interview how that was such a contributing factor to her never really going through an identity crisis. She never let that get her down. I think her perspective is so important, and let's jump right into it. So, yeah, how's it going? I'm so excited to get to interview you. You know, we interviewed your mom back in season 1, and she is such a delight. I'm sure you always feel like she's such a delight, right?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
That's awesome. But so, you know, we heard a little bit of your story through her, but I'd love to hear it through your perspective. So what is your adoption story?
So, yeah, I feel that my mom could probably give you a better, more detailed version of it. Considering I was too young to remember any of it. But, yeah, so my parents went all the way to Russia to get me, and I feel like it was like a total God thing that all worked out and that happened. But, yeah, they went to get me when I think I was like a few months old. And you probably heard my mom's episode with how that all went down. But, yeah, and then they moved back to Texas. We lived in close to like Brenham College Station area, and then we moved to Alvin, Texas, where I was raised and went to high school. So yeah.
Nice. And now you're in college in Colorado, and you know, this is something that we talked about in her episode some, but you definitely, I mean, you're Russian and you look Russian if someone were to tell you that you were Russian, but growing up in Texas, you were mistaken for Hispanic a lot, right?
Yeah, it was kind of, I mean, not weird, but like my skin tone was a little bit darker. I also was like super, super tan back then. And so I would get mistaken for that, but I'm like, no, I'm Russian.
So yeah, you never really got the opportunity because your mom is blonde and clearly white, and your dad is also white. So I think that I think people were surprised sometimes that you were adopted, but adoption was always part of your story, right? Like that was never hidden from you. It was never.
It was never hidden from me ever since I could like remember since I was little. It has always been a known thing to me. I forget the day, but we celebrated Gotcha Day when the papers were like official. It was like kind of like a second birthday, so that was always fun. And so they never hid it from me. They always said, if you want questions, like we'll answer them to the best we can. So it was always like a very open and very well known thing.
Yeah.
And I've never been like ashamed of it either. Like,
I think that's so awesome. And so that's part of why I wanted to have you on the episode, was just to talk about what you think that is attributed to, because there are so many adopted kids. And I think you probably even know other adopted kids who struggle more than you did. And that was never something that you struggled with or, I don't know, had that identity crisis. And so what do you think went right for you? I know that your parents always really honored your culture and your heritage, right?
Yeah, I mean, they weren't like giving me like Russian food or like teaching me Russian, but like, I mean,
what is Russian food even?
But yeah, they were always like, if you wanna, like, as I got older, my mom was like, if you wanna like do like a DNA search thing, and you can go do that, I won't be like offended by it or anything. I mean, I have never like wanted to do that. I don't know why. I feel like my mom is my mom. Like nothing's gonna change that. But I feel like going right with me, like they always made it a known thing, and it was always like a topic open for discussion. It was never like a hidden thing or something to like be ashamed about or anything like that.
Yeah. And so yeah, I love that. I think that for so many kids, and you and I have talked about this before in person, just that for so many kids, they grow up, and even if they know that they're adopted, they feel like they have to go through this process of figuring out who they are, or I don't know, separating themselves from their adoptive family just because they want to figure out where they came from or who they look like or whatever, but that's never really been appealing to you. Why do you think that is?
I think it's just because it's always been a known thing, so it's never like been like a big curiosity in my life. I mean, sometimes I feel like that's like bad to say, but like I care, but I like don't want to spend the like my mom's my mom. I was raised here. Like this is my home. Like I feel like I wouldn't want to like make that dramatic of a change this late in my life. I'm 21. I'm about to graduate college. So part of me is like I don't want to make a dramatic change and find that out. But then part of me is like, what if I did?
So what if you did? What do you think your attitude would be, or what do you think that your thought process would be?
I don't know. I've never really thought about it. Some of my friends actually this past year, like my adopted friends have like found their birth parents, and like some of them it went well, some of them it did not go well. So I'm like, I don't know. We'll just wait.
So I don't know, do you think that there was a time in your life where it hit you that was a possibility, that if you wanted to, you could figure this out, you could seek this information out, and you chose not to? Was that fork in the road like a defining point for you, or did it just never occur to you?
It just never really occurred to me.
Wow, I think that's so awesome.
Always like, this is who you are. You've always been adopted. So, I mean, like known things don't always like change your life. So it's like I said, it's always been a known thing. So I've never had like a ton of curiosity. It's not like I was 16 and they sat me down and were like, you're adopted. Like,
yeah, it's just always been a part of your life. Yeah. And I do love that. I guess I just, I see so many adopted kids who let that identity crisis beat them. They let it become an excuse, and I hate to, that probably sounds really heartless. I don't mean it like that, but they let it become a reason for them to fall back a little bit, or for them to distance themselves, or, I don't know. What am I trying to say? Like maybe just to fail some, to let themselves go, or to struggle. And the reason that they cite is like, well, I was abandoned, or I was thrown away, or just those negative things that kids can tell themselves. And I don't know, did any of those ever come to your mind? Did it ever?
Never. No negative thoughts towards it came to my mind. But I guess like if I'm to like talking to kids who are going through that, and just think like your adoptive parents chose you. Like you might have been abandoned, but they chose you. They wanted you more than anything, and that's why you were adopted. So that's how I think about it. Like my parents chose me. They love me. Even if I don't feel it sometimes, they do.
I love that they chose you and they wanted you more than anything. So if you were to give advice to adoptive parents to raise their kids the way that your parents raised you, to just love who you are and appreciate your story, what would you say?
I would definitely say, like, as early as you possibly can, just make it a known thing and let it be open for discussion. Like, I mean, I personally never had that much curiosity to like seek my birth parents, but some kids might, and I feel like that shouldn't be like hidden from them.
Yeah, but, like parents shouldn't take it personally.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're good at parenting, your kid won't just like totally abandon you for like their birth parents. Like I've never heard of that happening. So
right, but I think that's
make it open for discussion, and it shouldn't be something to be ashamed about.
Yeah, I think that can be the fear, though, as adoptive parents. You know, as sad as it is, we fear that they'll choose someone else over us if we let them, or if we let our guards down or something like that. And just throughout this podcast and talking to so many people who have had faith in God that won't happen, or just that it's not about us, that we as adoptive parents are not that important. I'm learning better of it, but it's stories like yours that definitely show me that means so much to you as an adopted kid. Just
yeah, like they are important. Like they chose their kid, like they're raising their kid. It's always important.
Yeah. So, and then you already touched on this a little bit, but if you were to give advice to maybe an older adopted kid who knows that they're adopted and is struggling with who they are, who they belong to, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that it's nothing to be ashamed about. Like your family loves you. They want to be around you. Like this is like this something that's part of who you are. It's not a negative thing.
Gotcha. Ah, I love it.
Unless you want to be president, then you really can't. But, from a different country like me.
Rats, you missed out on that one.
Oops. Oh, well. No free cake across the nation for y'all.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Leah. This is great.
Thanks for having me.
Gosh, guys, that's so awesome. I'm so excited that we've gotten to talk to 2 out of 3 so far of our adopted kid interviews. Next up, I am so excited to introduce you guys to JP Bubbas. He's 19, so he's the youngest out of all 3 of our interviews today, and he was adopted at 16, so he very much remembers his whole story, and he goes into that quite a bit, and I love his honesty and his openness. And I know that didn't come immediately, that he had such a bumpy start even after he was adopted, but he's come to appreciate his story, and he's come to understand that through God anything is possible. And I love it. I love his honesty, and I love his candor when he talks about his story. So let's hear it. Let's jump right into JP Bubbas. All right, welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast, and welcome to JP Bubbas. How are you doing?
I am great.
Good. I know you just got off work, so you're probably exhausted, right?
Very.
But speaking of your work, I think that is going to have a lot to do with your story, right?
Yes.
Awesome.
Correct.
So why don't you tell us about that? I'm so excited.
Well, I guess I'll start where my grandmother, she raised me basically, because my biological parents were they were on drugs or either in prison. Basically, I was born prematurely because my biological father abused my mom, and that caused me to be born early. After that, I started to live with my mom until I was 5 months old, and she took me to my grandmother's house, which is my dad's mom. And she asked if she would babysit me until she came back from grocery shopping. Basically, she never showed back up, and my grandmother took me in. And life with my grandmother was going to church every Sunday, raised Southern Baptist. So I knew who Jesus was. We were in church maybe 5 times a week.
Wow.
Not kidding at all.
That's a lot.
We were so involved. And basically, God was faithful through every struggle or whatever. There were times when we didn't have food on the table or food in the kitchen at that, and God would just provide, or we didn't have enough money to pay bills, and God would definitely provide for that. A lot of times we knew he may not come when we want him, but he's right on time. So my faith was pretty big at an early age. So basically I just lived life with her up until about 7th grade year. And 7th grade year, my biological dad got out of prison. And during this time, while I was growing up, I always went to go visit him in prison. So what kind of kid doesn't want their dad to be in their life? So I always looked up to him. I didn't know what he did. I just knew that I wanted my dad in my life because I lived at the time with my grandmother and my cousin, and she was a girl, so they were all women in my life. I wanted some type of male figure. So I was excited for him to come out, and once he got out, it was nothing like how I expected. I started to get abused every day. He would beat me for basically no reason, and he would go out and get drunk, and that really affected me. I started getting in trouble and started to try to do gang things at school and middle school. We didn't live in a nice area anyway, so it was easy for me to get caught up in a lot of negative things. And basically, I tried to get help one time. One time he really beat me bad and dragged me across the floor. And I tried to tell a teacher. And basically, DHS got involved. And my dad basically lied and said that he didn't do that. And somehow he got some other family members to say that I had been getting in trouble, which I had been at school, so they could already, my record wasn't good. So they said that I was an uncontrollable child, and I ended up, like, not getting any justice for that. So I was kind of hurt, not only by him and other family members, but by the DHS system.
Yeah.
Because they failed me. Because I felt like I knew I was getting, like, beat, but they didn't believe me because of my background. Basically, he got into a relationship, and they got into some trouble, and he went back to prison. And so I just lived back with my grandmother, and while I was living with her, everything was back to normal. She was a lady that raised me, so I loved her to death. I would do anything for her. And bills were still hard to be met and things like that. But I was about to turn 16. This was after my 9th grade year. I was probably 15, about to turn 16. This is 9th grade. And I would always want to work, like whether that was going to cut grass or sell some type of things or wash cars for money. Like I was always doing something to bring some type of income into the house so my granny wouldn't have to struggle, or we wouldn't have to struggle. So I knew at 16 or at 14 I could get a job. So I started working maybe like at little camps and things, but I was about to turn 16, so I thought it was time for like a real job. So right before I turned 16, I started working at a place called David's Burgers. And the real reason why I wanted a real job is because I wanted a new car. And I knew I was about to turn 16, so I could start driving. So I got my license and everything, and I started working there. I loved it, every part of it. I could go there and be somebody that my background said I couldn't. I could go there and smile and cater to people, make other people happy, and that just made me happy. Basically, I got to know some really good people there. 2 girls, to be exact. It was Tabitha and a girl named Derica, and we were 2 peas in a pod. They were a lot older than me, but they were like my older sisters. They would look out for me. I could talk to them about some things and just share with them what I was going through. And they had heard my story before. So basically, going into I got my car and everything, and I finished sophomore year working there. Going into my junior year, my grandmother told me that my dad was about to get out of prison. And that kind of made me worry because I knew how he was. But, something deep down inside, I was like, well, I can forgive him. I can't hold that over. And that's what the Christian thing would be to do. So I just stressed that to my friends at work, and I was just letting them know, like, I'm kind of nervous about this. And they were like, well, if that ever happens, you can always come stay with us. And they have their own place. But, I didn't think that was a good idea. Like, I only knew them at work, and like, I don't know. I was young. I was still in school. I didn't know what to do. So,
right.
He basically got out of prison, and he started doing the same things. He started drinking a lot and abusing me again. And I was just, at that point, I knew who God was, and I was just so upset with God because I was like, well, God, if you really love me, why are you letting me go through this? Like, why is this happening? And at the time, I was so upset, and I got to a point of when the abuse was steady in my life. I got to a point where I was either going to commit suicide or kill him. And when I knew it was at that point is when he started to raise his hands to my grandmother, the lady that I loved and that raised me. And
was this his mom?
This was his mom.
Wow.
So he was really bad on drugs and alcohol. And it really affected our family a lot. Like, my relationship with my granny was really bad. I couldn't trust anyone. But I started to share with the people at work about what I was going through, and it was just, I worked all the time. I'm telling you, I was in school and a full-time student, and I was working 30 hours a week just to stay away from home. But somehow every time I went home, he would keep me up till like 3 in the morning, just like screaming at me and beating at me, and I was just so over it. So, but when I was at work, it was just, I could be somebody that I wasn't, and I could smile and be happy and just have a lot of joy. And basically, the day that I made up in my mind, he beat me really bad, and I was like, I'm done, and I was going to kill him. And I packed up all my things and I put them in my car, and I was going to sleep in my car. And the next day, I went to school like any normal day, and I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night. Basically, I went into work, and one of the managers pulled me over to the side, and he was on the phone. So I was like, okay, who do you want me to talk to? And at that time, I had called DHS again that day and told them that I wasn't going back, and then I was in an abusive home. And I told them that I was never going back. And basically, the manager, Jose, he's the one that hired me. He was taking me upstairs, and that's where HR was at the time for David's Burgers, the company that I was working for. And I was nervous to go up there because I was like, well, HR is where you get either fired or hired, and I already had the job. So I was like, okay, this is going to be the icing on the cake. I'm about to lose my job, and I'm like, don't know where I'm going to live. But I went into the office, and I see these two white people. And I'm like, who are they? Like, I've seen their pictures hanging up in the lobby, but I never knew who they were. And it was Alan and Jessica Bubba's holding a newborn baby named Moses. And they said, well, hey, JP, we heard about what you were going through, and we just want to open up our homes to you. And at that point, I really didn't know what to think. And some people I didn't know at first, but I knew I was in a bad situation, and there was just something pulling me. And then he went on to say, well, I have kids at the house. I have 4 little boys. And he said, well, we go to church every Sunday. And I was like, well, something in me, like, even though I was mad at God, and I was like, me too, I'm saved out of nowhere. I was like, I know Jesus Christ, and I don't know, that had to be the Holy Spirit speaking through me, because at that time, I was so spiritually low, and I just remember Alan crying, and we all cried, and we prayed. I told him my story, and ever since then, I've been living with them. And DHS, the next day, we had to have a meeting with DHS and my biological dad. And I went there, and the next day, and DHS, the lady was so rude to me. She basically said that I could go to jail if they have no foster care people, no homes open for me. That's where they hold foster care people. Basically scared me. And then she said that it's not what it seems. She said I could get into a home where they abuse me again. And then she basically said that she had a party to go to, and that probably wasn't the best choice for me. So she wanted me to make a decision really fast. And at that time, even though I paid my own bills and my own car note, my dad took my keys and my phone because they were in his name. And I was really scared. I couldn't call Alan and Jessica. So I agreed to stay. But instead of that night staying, I told them I was going to work, and I never went back. Basically, God worked it out. and it's just an amazing story. How I worked for them for a year, and now they're my parents, and I've been living with them for almost 4 years, and just seeing baby Moses grow, and just seeing a new baby born. He was born 5 days ago. Just seeing how God uses this family in my life, it's just been a blessing. So that's been my story.
Wow, that's an insane story. Wow, I'm like trying to think of what to comment on first. So first of all, congratulations on the new sibling. Yeah, that's exciting. So that makes what, six boys? Goodness,
Yes.
your mom is a
Three
saint.
of us are adopted and 3 are biologically theirs.
Wow. Did they adopt the other kids through the foster care system?
They did.
Okay, awesome. So you were never actually in the foster care system, right?
I was not.
Right, but you were 17, I guess, at the time of your
I
adoption.
was 16.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah. I was 16 when I started living with them, so.
Gotcha. Okay, so, the purpose of this episode, and we've talked about this, is just to talk about adoption success stories. So you're an adult now, and you're clearly doing pretty well. You're in college, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're still working, and you haven't killed anyone or been arrested.
Yes.
So you're doing really well. Good job.
Yes.
But what do you think you owe that to? Because obviously I think that you have a lot of resilience. I can just hear that in that you didn't let your circumstances beat you down to where you just gave up and you said, none of this, I have no control over my life. And instead you took control. What do you think caused you to do that? Because there are so many kids that are your age that were struggling with very similar things that just say, why even try?
Well, one is that I was in that situation and I saw him like that. And I know someday I may want to have kids, and I don't want to be that type of parent. So one thing that pushed me is not wanting to be like my biological parents. Just wanted to be better than them, be who God called me to be, and step into that role. And I definitely can't be like that, drinking alcohol or doing drugs and not making good decisions. So that really caused me to want to change. What caused the change are my parents and the love that they showed me. I'm telling you, I've grown more in the 3 years that I've been living with them than in my whole entire life. A lot of people that I meet now that knew me in high school, they're like, JP, you're totally different. Mm-hmm. And not only is that because of God, but that's because of my parents. I'll let you know this. So even when they took me in, I was going out to parties and I would drink and I would smoke, and I would come home at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and my dad wouldn't say anything. He would be up. I didn't call him Dad at the time. I called him Alan, but he would be sitting at the bar, and he wouldn't say anything. He would be like, did you have a good night? I'd be like, yeah. And he'd be like, well, good night. And that went on and on. But I went to church with him every Sunday. And this was a new church, something that I wasn't used to. I was used to a Southern Baptist black church. And the church that they went to was a Baptist church full of all white people. So I was the only black person, which was okay because I'm mixed anyway. So I was like, okay, I can fit in at least half.
Half of your DNA fits in. Half of it.
Yeah, so I started going there. Didn't really fit in, but I was always a personable person, so I could always go wherever and talk to anyone. But my mom, Jessica, at the time, she signed me up for this camp during Martin Luther King weekend. I was still 16, about to turn 17, and I didn't want to go because it was 4 days. Can't have your phone with these white people I don't know. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to go to this. But she signed me up anyway, and she was like, well, you're going. I paid my money. So I went, and God wrecked my life. God came in, and really that time he was talking about, that's when Oh Come to the Altar came out, and really music was a big part of my life when I was going through all that. That's how I really stay connected to Christ, even with prayer. That's one thing that my grandmother taught me, and that's how God provided food and money for us to live off of. So when I went to this camp, God really showed up in my life, and it was all about forgiveness and how God knitted me in the womb, and it was just in Psalms, and like how He knows my every thoughts. It's Psalms 139. Search me, God, and know my heart, and that's exactly what God knew. And there was just a realization that weekend, knowing that God loves me so much, and there was a purpose and there was a reason why I went through what I was going through. And so when I went back, basically I gave my life to God, and my parents were like, what has gotten into JB? Like, they could tell something was different. And I just started acting different, and that's because I knew better. But I'll let you know after this, after you're on this mountaintop experience.
Right, the camp high.
The camp high, you start to go down the mountain. And I started to try to go to these different parties, but it was different this time. I would come back and my dad would be sitting up, and I would get punished if I did anything, like if I was drunk or if I was high or if I was out too late past curfew. He would take my phone and he would take my car, and it was just different things. And I didn't understand that until now, because I was kind of upset because I still pay my own bills. But I didn't understand, but he did it because he loved me. And it really correlates with the Father's love, that God loves us, and that accountability that my dad had for me. And that's how God is. He'll correct you when you know what's up. When you know what's right, truly, God will let you know, and you'll know in your heart what's right. And I'm telling you, the love that my parents have showed me throughout these years, and my ups and downs, and through everything, they've just been there, and they've been there, that support. I'm telling you, that's a big part, because I'm telling you from experience, I didn't have parents. I only had my grandma, and she only could do what she's raised her sets of kids. She didn't have to raise me. And there's just a difference between a mother and father's love than a grandmother's love. And that's what I was missing the whole time. And when I started to see that unconditional love that my parents have for me, it was different, and something clicked. Like, I need to do everything that I can to pour into them because they're pouring into me. And that's how it is with Christ. He loves me so much, and he pours into me so much that I want to pour into him. And it's crazy that they signed me up for this to go to Kenya last year. And I had never gone out the country, and they weren't going. So it was my first time going out the country to a third world country in Africa by myself without them. But they trusted me enough. It was their way of shooting me out the quiver, because they have trained me enough. And I went there, and God used me so much that I had never seen. I never knew that God could use me that much. But it really is because they took the time to love on me at my darkest times. Crazy thing is that I worked at David's Burgers, became a general manager. I'm in corporate now.
What?
Yeah, I was a manager before they even took me in. I was training for MIT, but I've gotten fired from David's Burgers 2 times, and they're my parents, and they own it. And it's just that tough love, that hard love, that unconditional love. Even though they are my parents, they know how to correct me, they know how to talk to me, and the best thing about it is that it was a learning process for them too, because they didn't know. They all had kids that were 10 and younger when I moved in. So I was a 16-year-old, had hard times, probably had a bad attitude, and it was just they didn't know how to have a teenager. So, and I'm sure a lot of adoptive parents don't know how to raise a teenager, but it's crazy, just their learning experience. That's what it was with me. They would admit when they messed up or when they had mistakes. I would admit when I messed up or when I made mistakes. and we worked through them together. Even when my parents made mistakes or when my dad made mistakes, we would make punishments. He didn't always go through his, but I would always, like, if I screamed or something, I would always get punished. And I think it's just crazy to think about how much a father's love can just mean a lot. It really does. And the time, it really does mean a lot to me. So.
Well, and I have to say how awesome it is that you clearly had some father issues. I don't know how you could go through what you went through and yet you still gave your dad now the grace and the patience, and you let your guard down, which takes, it takes all Jesus basically, but it also takes some work on your part, because I imagine you probably, getting into the big words and everything here, but I imagine you had some PTSD and other stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Alan probably took some steps towards you, and you had all kinds of memories, but you worked through those things, and that's amazing.
Yes.
So yeah, your parents sound awesome, but you sound awesome too. And I'm so impressed that you've made it into adulthood and you have such a great outlook and you've made it through those hard times. And that's not to say that your life is perfect or that everything is great, but, you're such an amazing success story. And I wanted to ask you, so if you were speaking to a teenager who just got adopted and they are completely unsure of what's going on or how they're supposed to be, what encouragement or advice would you give them?
I would say, that's hard. I would say that to show their parents grace, or whoever took them in grace, because they've probably never been in that situation. And that takes me back to when I first moved in. I felt like a lot of things that they were doing, I didn't understand them, and it was hard for me to grasp that because I never had parents. As far as like getting on punishment or them taking my phone away, I didn't think that I deserved that. But it's all a learning experience, and I would advise them to don't be afraid to take your guard down, and don't be afraid to take it one at a time. It's not going to happen all at once, but it definitely takes some work, and don't expect them to be perfect. Just know that we're made perfect in Christ, and we all fall short of perfection. So just know that everyone makes mistakes, including me, including you, and including our parents. So just know that take each day by day, step by step, moment by moment, and thank God for the little things, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Oh, that's some great advice. And so on the flip side of that, if you are talking to adoptive parents who just got a teenager in their home, it's a similar situation what your parents went through. So basically me, because I don't know how much you know about my story, but we had a baby, an 8-month-old, and then we adopted a 14-year-old. So we were way out of our league and had no idea what we were doing. So what would you say to people like your parents who don't know what they're doing, but they're just trying to make a difference?
Basically kind of the same thing. I don't know how spiritual y'all are, but really just take it moment by moment and step by step. You have to. I think it took a lot of times for my parents to tune into the Holy Spirit, because I was not the friendliest at times, it took a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to heal wounds and sores. A lot of people think it's okay to just put a bandage over it, but even at the doctor's office, you know that they say to remove the bandage to let airflow get to the wound. So talk with them, talk them through it, listen to them. I feel like a lot of times that's why a lot of disagreements in our household happened was because we didn't hear each other out. So I would just advise y'all to listen and try to get to the root of the problem, and find a solution together. So
yeah. Oh, that's great advice. Thank you so much, JP. I am so glad we got to do this interview. I think it's so important for everyone to hear everything you just said, basically. All right.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you
for
so
sure.
much.
Thank you for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I know this stuff is hard, and I hope you found encouragement here. Remember, you are enough, and you're doing a great job. God wants to be at the center of this journey, and He is big enough to redeem all of our mistakes. Don't forget to check out show notes and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks again for listening.